sharper than death. First was sharpening the mind. The Institute of Arcane Mechanics accepted the ordinary for just this business, and Kira found herself among those who too had been spurned by natural talent. Study and practice was no stranger to her, having earned the title of Dr. Crow at the Hornsworth College of Practical Medicine many years ago. Instead of healing, she now applied herself to runic forging, taught by elves whose skin shimmered with phosphorescent sigils and who could handle incandescent blades with bare fingers. For a form, she chose a sweeping cutlass upon which she might redouble her efforts to sharpen its single scything edge. She traced runic patterns in wax across the beaten metal to imbue it with unnatural speed and a keener profile. Volcanic acid darkened the steel black, and the wax was melted away to reveal glowing blue sigils beneath. A ghoul with long, slow arms instructed her on how to sharpen a curved blade. Finished, Kira sat in the workshop, lit by the heart of the forge, and drew her creation through a knotted hemp rope to test the edge. The fibers sheared with ease, but it was still not sharp enough. Death stood invisibly in the doorway and watched in professional appreciation. On his way out, he stopped to collect a student's deceased ambition with a flick of his scythe. Second was making a deal. This would be the messiest of 8 steps, and Kira wanted to get it out of the way early. She also believed in the motivation of deadlines. In the damp and crystal-lit Krazak caverns, the cult of Krezar sang in low tones and danced to exhaustion around their anathematized altar. Undulating limestone walls dripped with condensed sweat and exaltations. Kira pushed through the throng. She hadn't bothered to learn the language or the words of their heretical chants, nor the steps to their feverish cavorting. Such displays were the trimming and trappings of tepid commitment. She reached the dais, a polished onyx plinth upon which insipid offerings to Krezar were laid. The congregation gasped as she swept the tributes off the altar and climbed herself upon it. Standing tall, she drew her luminous blade and held it over her head. "Krezar, I offer the latter half of my natural life to you in exchange for keeping true this blade for eternity and sharpening it so that it may cut even the unseen and intangible." The crystals of the cave glowed crimson, and from a vacuous cloud of darkness, Krezar appeared before his profane followers for the first time in a millennium. The dancing and singing stopped, and the air cloyed with silence. Krezar wore a goat pelt over Salamanda's slick and ruby-red skin. He drew a blade from his hip and plunged it into Kira's belly. Kira gasped, but not from pain, as there was none, but rather from the sanguine power that leached from the blade into her body, up her arms, through her fingers, and finally sinking into her own sword. The sigils turned from blue to purple, and Krezar unsheathed his weapon from his applicant's torso. Kira knew the pain would be repaid at the end of their bargain. Death stood amongst the supplicants, unnoticed by all except for Krezar, who nodded in deference before vanishing. Death reached into his grim robes and produced an amethyst hourglass, through which the sands of Kira's life drained. Death's timekeeping was infallible, but he double-checked it just in case. Third was taking an oath. To keep a promise was the reason Kira had begun her journey, and she traveled to the granite halls of Sanctum Veritas to turn her promise into an oath. The sanctum was monolithically hewn from the peak of Mount Judica, where rarefied wind billowed golden banners. Devotion was the price of entry, and Kira meditated outside the portcullis, with her sword laid across her lap, denying her body food and moving only to sip water. On the 30th day, the portcullis opened, and she was granted entrance. A paladin woman named Ulma, who bore the emblem of a red-tailed hawk and was head and shoulders taller than Kira, instructed her on the art of oath-making. The sanctum was a work in progress. 1,000 years ago, the founder had sworn an oath that the whole of Mount Judica would be carved until the sanctum and the mountain were one and the same. It would become a home for all in the world who held truth and devotion in their heart. Kira perspired alongside Ulma, carving granite. Some days they would work with titanic hammers and iron pitons to excavate in bulk, with the thin air reverberating with each strike. Other days, They worked with delicate chisels and wooden mallets to carve devotional filigree into the walls. Making an oath from a promise was not unlike carving granite, Alma said. An oath is the truth within the promise. Taking an oath, Alma said, did not mean vowing to fulfill a promise, but finding the truth within the promise and believing it fully and completely. Kira meditated on the promise she had made for 12 full months, and by the end her hands were calloused, and her promise was carved to truth. She left the gates of Sanctum Veritas holding that truth in her heart. Death watched Kira descending the gray mountainside, a speck of purple and gold against the vastness of tectonic upheaval. Kira's mouth was drawn grim, and he recognized the expression from when he had worked long and hard alongside her on the front lines. Kira had been a young and talented doctor, but the energy of youth and the most capable hands in the kingdom were little matched to the fires of war. Would Kira be able to see him now? She had not seen him in the caves of Krazak, nor could she when forging her blade with the elves. She had seen him once, though, collapsed behind an army tent, her hands slick with blood and face wet with tears. She looked up from the mud and saw him. It was that day she made her promise. Wishing was not something death was made to do, but he wished anyway to know the truth Kira now held, the oath she had taken. Fourth was to transform the body. There were a few options here, but the best one required deceit. 500,000 years ago, the gods played chess with the ordinary people of the land and decided they needed stronger pieces. Each god bore or sired a single progeny. These demigods became the first sorcerers, some of which seized power and defined royal lines of godly blood that persisted, though diluted, to the present day. So Kira returned with distaste to the kingdom that had sent her to war and applied herself once more to the practice of medicine. She played her own game, currying favor and gathering intelligence from minor officials and captains that still knew her name. On one tactical night, she intercepted a messenger seeking a midwife for one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting, and from that healthy birth she gained attention and confidence from the most pretentious inner circles. 2 years into her game, she was ready to make her final move within the gaudy and golden halls of the palace. Her prey was a paranoid and cruel duke. He had chronic indigestion, a symptom of his overdecadence, and she stoked his paranoia into a frenzy. It was demons, she said, who had poisoned his blood. She could filter his blood and remove the demonic, if he let her. The Duke acquiesced, and in her clinic she sedated him on an exam table. With a goose quill needle she pierced his arm at the crook. The Duke's blood ran through a silver tube and into an alike needle inserted into Kira's own arm. At length he awoke, and a little worse for wear, stumbled home to drink against Kira's advice. Kira stared at the bandage she tied around her elbow. How would it feel to have a god's blood in her veins? The god in question was the highest of them all, Vyrian, the god of the sun and stars. Yet she felt nothing. Had it not worked, or was patience required? Truthfully, she wasn't sure what she was expecting to feel. A small movement caught her eye, and she watched a silvery spider descend from the ceiling on a silk thread, landing delicately on the exam table next to the bloodied transfuser. With a flourish, the spider transformed into a snow-white ferret, which grasped the transfuser in its tiny paws and licked at the residual blood with a pink tongue. It made a face and spat. "I enjoyed watching your game, but I'm sorry to say your prize is counterfeit. There isn't a drop of divine blood in that fool's fabricated heritage. For that you have something in common," the ferret said. The blood left stains on the furry white corners of its mouth. "Silva, god of trickery, I presume." Kira said carefully, "It's a privilege. To what do I owe the honor?" The ferret leapt from the exam table and onto Kira's shoulder. Kira did her best not to flinch. "You seek Vyrian's blood, or the blood of any god," the ferret whispered in Kira's ear, its whiskers tickling her neck. Kira considered her next words. Vyrian's blood had been her target, both due to opportunity, but also due to power. However, If she were to restart her ploy on new prey, she would still be chasing a dilute bloodline. To get a lesser god's blood directly from the source, surely that would be more powerful. Not just any divine blood, Kira said, but it would be a blessing to share yours. What is your price? The soft fur turned to scales, and silver, in viperous form, sank fangs into Kira's neck. Instead of venom, silver blood was injected, and Kira tasted metal in her tongue. The viper turned too.